What we have to cover it, so let's ask about it. What's the relationship that you had with Michael Jackson?
Had or have? I mean, it's kind
Had
of,
both.
you know, whatever.
Let's go with had to
Listen,
have.
no, he's a good friend of mine, and he still is. I mean, everything that's going on, I mean, it's unfortunate. It's an unfortunate situation for everyone involved, and, you know,
How'd you first get to meet him?
I first met him, he kind of called me randomly.
At 43, Macaulay Culkin is finally breaking his silence, and what he's saying about Michael Jackson will stop you in your tracks. For decades, rumors, jokes, and headlines have surrounded their strange friendship. Was it innocent? Was it dangerous? Everyone had an opinion, but Culkin never cracked. Until now. In a rare, deeply personal moment, the former child star is speaking plainly about what really happened behind the gates of Neverland. No drama, no PR spin, just the truth. And it's not what you think. Why did Jackson reach out to a 10-year-old boy after Home Alone? What did they talk about in private? And why, after all these years, is Culkin finally ready to say this out loud? Stay with us. Because what he reveals isn't just a story about Michael Jackson. It's a story about fame, friendship, and surviving the spotlight. The phone call that started it all. It began with a phone call. Macaulay Culkin was just 10 years old when he answered the line and heard a soft, familiar voice say, "Hi, it's Michael." Yes, that Michael. Michael Jackson, the king of pop. Culkin had just become a global sensation after Home Alone turned him into Hollywood's golden boy. Michael Jackson, already a living legend, didn't reach out like a fan or a celebrity looking for attention. He reached out like someone who saw something. Not in Culkin's talent, but in his isolation. He called out of the blue, Culkin said. It was strange at first, but not weird. It was like he understood something about me. They weren't introduced through agents. No contracts, no handlers, just instinct. Two people, both trapped in the bizarre vacuum of fame before they could even understand it. Jackson saw in Culkin what the world didn't. Another child performing adulthood, smiling for crowds but shrinking inside. That phone call, casual and surreal, would be the start of one of the most talked about and most judged friendships in pop culture history. But for Culkin, it wasn't strange. It felt familiar. He wasn't calling me because I was famous. He was calling because he knew what fame did to kids. And with that, one conversation turned into a friendship, one that would raise eyebrows, stir controversy, and, in Macaulay's words, change everything. Because the boy behind the fame, he needed someone who actually understood. The boy behind the fame. By the time he was 10, Macaulay Culkin wasn't just famous. He was everywhere. His face was on lunchboxes, cereal boxes, magazine covers, but the spotlight that made him a household name also cast a very long shadow. I was lonely, Culkin admitted years later. Really lonely. He was bullied at school, especially in the Catholic classrooms where being famous didn't earn you respect. It earned you mockery. His parents were managing his career more than his childhood. Strangers adored him. But behind the cameras, he felt completely alone. Michael Jackson saw that. And not because he read about it. He lived it. As a child, Jackson had been paraded around by his own father, performing with the Jackson 5 when most kids were learning how to ride bikes. He knew what it meant to smile for the world while feeling invisible inside. That's where their bond began. Not in Hollywood glitz, but in shared wounds. It wasn't about age, Culkin said. It was about survival. Their friendship didn't grow in interviews or premieres. It grew in the quiet moments, on phone calls, on car rides, in places where they didn't have to perform. Maureen Orth couldn't explain it. Tabloids mocked it. But to them, it wasn't confusing. It was comforting. Because before any scandal or speculation, there were just two boys trying to feel normal. And the world didn't understand what it was looking at. The world watched and judged. From the moment the friendship became public, people had questions. Why would a 30-something pop star be hanging out with a 10-year-old movie star? Was it healthy? Was it weird? Late-night comedians made jokes. Tabloid headlines screamed suspicion. Every move was scrutinized. And every visit to Neverland Ranch fed the fire. But inside that firestorm, Culkin stood firm. He was silly, Culkin said. He was sweet. It wasn't weird to me. People wanted it to be something it wasn't. He described Jackson as someone who laughed a lot, played games, and acted more like a goofy teenager than a music icon. To Culkin, he wasn't Michael Jackson, pop god. He was just Michael, quirky, fragile, emotionally stunted. The public, however, projected their fears onto the friendship. Because when something doesn't fit into a box, people try to tear it apart. Still, Culkin never backed down. In interviews, he stuck to one message. It wasn't what people thought. It was never inappropriate, never sinister. Just two misfits, finding a weird kind of peace in each other's company. And while the world questioned their bond, what happened behind the gates of Neverland painted a very different picture. Because for Culkin, Neverland wasn't a trap. It was a hideout. Inside Neverland, innocence or illusion. If the public imagined Neverland as something mysterious or creepy, Culkin remembers it more like a sleepaway camp with a rich friend. There were water balloon fights, pillow wars, late nights in the arcade playing Mortal Kombat until someone fell asleep on the beanbags. Michael would prank call celebrities just to make them laugh. He acted younger than me, Culkin said once. He'd giggle for hours. He was just odd in a fun way. He didn't see Jackson as intimidating. He saw him as someone who never got to be a kid when he was one. And now, as a grown man, he was trying to catch up on what he missed. That's what made Neverland so strange and so misunderstood. On the outside, it looked too perfect, too whimsical. But inside, it was quiet, almost sad. Jackson filled it with joy because he didn't know how to live without it. He was like a 12-year-old with money, Culkin joked, but that's what made it feel safe. Still, the media didn't see sleepovers. They saw scandal. They didn't see two lost kids. They saw opportunity to stir fear. But behind the games and laughter, the darker reality was coming fast. Because eventually, what was once a private friendship would be dragged into a public courtroom. And Macaulay Culkin, he would have to take the stand. Courtroom Shadows. The 2005 trial. In 2005, Michael Jackson stood trial for child molestation. The case gripped the world. Cameras lined the courthouse steps. Protesters clashed outside. Witnesses came forward. Allegations mounted. And then, Macaulay Culkin was called to testify. It had been years since they were close, but the bond between them still lingered. Culkin sat alone in a courthouse bathroom when Jackson walked in. He looked nervous, Culkin remembered. He said, "We probably shouldn't talk." It was just a whisper, but it spoke volumes. Fear, pressure, and the strange reality that their private friendship was now public evidence. On the stand, Culkin didn't hesitate. "Nothing happened," he said, under oath. Clear, consistent, unwavering. He wasn't coached, he wasn't paid. And he had no reason to protect someone the world had already condemned. But he did. Because his truth never changed. He never touched me. Never did anything inappropriate. That's the truth, Culkin told the court. Even years later, through every podcast and interview, he's repeated the same words. No edits, no hesitation, no agenda. The trial ended. Jackson was acquitted. But the doubt never fully disappeared from the public. Still, Culkin stayed firm. And what's most surprising, his story didn't grow louder over time. It stayed exactly the same. A story that never changed. In the years following the trial, the world waited for Macaulay Culkin to change his tune, to reveal something darker, to break the silence with some shocking admission. But it never came. Instead, what came was consistency. From Larry King Live to Oprah, from The Tonight Show to podcasts decades later, Culkin has never shifted his story. "He never did anything to me, not once," he said on Inside of You with Michael Rosenbaum in 2023. He's had every opportunity to cash in. Books, documentaries, exposés. In a media landscape that rewards confession, even if it's manufactured, Culkin never played that game. "I have nothing to hide," he said. "There's nothing to tell. That's the truth." Some found that frustrating, others comforting. But to Culkin, the truth never needed to be rebranded. He didn't have some secret tucked away for a rainy day. There was no twist ending, just memory and loyalty. Even as people around him gave their own versions, added their own spin, or fed the fire with speculation, Culkin held steady. And maybe that's what makes his voice so powerful in this story. Not because it's loud, but because it's unchanging. Still, loyalty doesn't always come from admiration. Sometimes it comes from understanding. And Macaulay always believed Jackson wasn't just trying to be his friend, he was trying to protect him. He wanted to protect me. To the public, Michael Jackson was a superstar, eccentric, elusive, explosive. But to Macaulay Culkin, he was something far less dramatic and far more human. He was like a big brother, Culkin once said. Sometimes he felt more like a parent. Their bond wasn't built on glitter and fame. It was built on the dark undercurrent of what both of them had survived. Childhoods that weren't really childhoods. Jackson saw something in Culkin he recognized too well. A boy trying to stay whole in a machine designed to break you. Behind closed doors, it wasn't about concerts or VIP treatment. It was advice, warnings, comfort. "He told me not to trust people," Culkin recalled. He said, "This business will eat you alive." Jackson wasn't always confident. He was goofy, insecure, even socially awkward. But with Culkin, he didn't have to perform. He could be vulnerable. "He saw me," Culkin said. "That meant everything." It wasn't about being cool or famous. It was about being understood. And that feeling stuck with Culkin long after Neverland, long after the headlines. That bond didn't end with Jackson's death. It extended to the next generation, especially to someone who shares Jackson's name, his eyes, and his sense of being misunderstood. Paris. Jackson, a godfather's devotion. If there's one relationship that proves how deep the connection really went, it's the one Culkin shares with Paris Jackson, Michael's daughter and his goddaughter. "She's my family," Culkin has said, and he means it. They've been seen together at red carpet events, at coffee shops in LA, even getting matching tattoos, tiny spoons inked on their arms, a private joke turned permanent bond. But their relationship isn't for show. It's quiet, protected, real. Culkin doesn't speak much about Paris in public. When he does, it's with a fierce protectiveness. "She's tall, beautiful, smart," he said in a rare interview. "And I love her deeply." It's not a PR connection. It's not about headlines. It's about loyalty and shared grief. Both of them grew up in the shadow of a man the world tried to define for them. Both of them are still figuring out what parts of that legacy they want to carry. Paris has spoken openly about her struggles, her search for identity. Culkin doesn't give her advice publicly. He shows up, quietly, consistently. Their bond is a living reminder that Michael Jackson's presence didn't disappear in 2009. It carried on in ink, in memories, and in the people who still call him family. And the thing they shared most wasn't fame. It was the fight to feel normal. Fame as a cage. For both Jackson and Culkin, fame came too soon and too fast. Jackson was singing on national TV at 5 years old. Culkin was breaking box office records before he hit double digits. While the world cheered them on, they were both being robbed of the one thing every child needs: a childhood. He wasn't social, Culkin said. He never learned how to be normal. The money, the tours, the awards, none of it filled the void. In fact, it widened it. Fame created walls they couldn't climb down from. Everything they did, every mistake, every friend, they were all public property. And with no escape, they built strange little worlds around themselves. Jackson had Neverland. Culkin had isolation. Both tried to carve out private lives in the most public of existences. "There's a reason we connected," Culkin explained. "We didn't have to explain ourselves." Because who else could understand what it's like to be adored by millions but feel completely alone? Their friendship wasn't an escape from reality. It was reality, the only one that made any sense to them. And maybe that's why it made so little sense to everyone else. But even in that strange, misunderstood space, there were still things Culkin couldn't explain. Things the world would never stop questioning. Public misunderstanding. If there's one thing that made Michael Jackson the most controversial figure in pop culture, it wasn't just the allegations, it was the confusion. He admitted to sharing beds with kids, but insisted it was innocent. He called it slumber parties, movie nights, a return to the childhood he never had. To the world, that sounded like a red flag. But to Culkin, it wasn't sinister. It was sad. He didn't understand how people would react, Culkin said. He wasn't normal. He didn't grow up like us. He didn't think like an adult. Culkin never pretended it wasn't unusual. It was, but to him, Jackson wasn't hiding anything. He was stuck, frozen emotionally, somewhere around 12 years old. That's what made it so complicated. Jackson wasn't pretending to be childlike. He was. And in a world full of grown-up predators, liars, and manipulators, sometimes the weirdest thing is actually the most innocent. Culkin has always maintained he was odd, he was lonely, but he wasn't evil. Still, the world projected its fears onto the friendship, and in doing so, it missed something real. Because behind the myths and misunderstandings, there was a simple, tragic truth. Two boys, lost in a world that didn't know how to love them as they were. The homicide ruling and aftermath. Michael Jackson died on June 25, 2009. The headlines said cardiac arrest, but the autopsy said otherwise: homicide. The cause? Acute propofol intoxication. Administered by Dr. Conrad Murray, his personal physician. The world mourned. But the circumstances only deepened the mystery that always surrounded Jackson's life and death. Culkin didn't speak much then. He stayed silent while the media did what it always does: speculate. Jackson was buried with grandeur, but his legacy felt splintered. There were vigils, but also questions. He was mourned like a legend and examined like a case file. Still, through the chaos, Culkin never changed his story. No tell-all, no rebranding, no truth bomb timed for media attention. "Why would I lie now?" he said years later. "There's nothing to gain. He's gone." If anything, Jackson's death sealed Culkin's resolve. He had nothing left to prove, no one left to defend, except maybe the version of Jackson that he knew. The one who sang in whispers, laughed at cartoons, and warned him to stay away from toxic people in the industry. Many took Jackson's death as confirmation that his life was spiraling, that he was lost in shame, fear, and pain. But Culkin saw it differently. He was in pain, yeah, but he always was, he said. That's why he made Neverland. It wasn't a secret, it was a shield. A shield that didn't save him. But for a time, it gave him peace, and for Culkin, it gave him something else. A chance to befriend someone who understood him in a way no one else ever did. And now, with the years behind him, he's ready to explain what that friendship really meant. The legacy of a misunderstood man. Michael Jackson was a man of extremes, idolized and vilified, often at the same time. People couldn't make up their minds. Was he a genius, a victim, a monster, a myth? To Macaulay Culkin, he was something much simpler. He was awkward, Culkin said. He was kind. He was trying to find joy wherever he could. That's what people miss when they talk about Jackson's legacy. They focus on the moonwalk, the thriller jacket, the controversy. But Culkin saw the man behind all of it, the boy who never really left the stage. He'd wear pajamas to dinner. He'd talk to animals like they were people. That wasn't performance. That was just him. For Culkin, Jackson's eccentricity wasn't a cover. It was a symptom of a life stolen too early, of trauma that never healed, of a world that watched him burn but never tried to cool the flame. That's why Neverland wasn't a fantasy land. It was a fortress, built to protect the most fragile parts of someone who was expected to be larger than life, someone who had to sing and dance to survive. And their friendship? It wasn't built on magic tricks and celebrity perks. It was built on mutual recognition. Culkin never wanted to be Michael Jackson's friend for clout. He wanted to be his friend because no one else really saw him. And in that bond, something pure survived, even when everything else fell apart. From Neverland to now. After Michael Jackson's death in 2009, Neverland Ranch became a ghost story. The rides stopped spinning. The gates stayed closed. The magic, the mystery, dissolved into silence. But while the world shifted its gaze to the next tabloid headline, one person never quite escaped the ripple effect: Macaulay Culkin. For years, Culkin had been known as the kid from Home Alone, the face of a generation. But fame at that level doesn't fade. It warps. And after Jackson passed, the media lens turned back on Culkin with a vengeance. Photos circulated online, his frame thinner, his eyes sunken, his smile missing. The headlines were brutal. From child star to tragedy. Culkin strung out and alone. Speculation exploded. Drug use, depression, a total breakdown. And while not every rumor was true, Culkin didn't deny that something was wrong. "I was burned out," he admitted later. "I didn't want to act. I didn't want to be anything." He dropped out of the public eye entirely. No movies, no press, just silence. For a long time, he didn't even leave the house unless he had to. His world became small, tight, safe. A cocoon, not unlike the one Michael had tried to build for himself at Neverland. During those years, Culkin said he was trying to figure out who he was without the cameras, without the applause. "It took me years to separate who I was from what the world saw." Eventually, something shifted, slowly, gently. He dipped his toe back into acting, not blockbusters, but indie projects, voice work, comedy. He started showing up on podcasts, sounding sharper, clearer, lighter. Then came Mila Kunis, a longtime friend turned partner. They fell in love quietly, away from paparazzi. "She saw me," he said, "not the fame, just me." And in 2021, they welcomed their first child, a baby boy named Dakota, after Culkin's late sister. Suddenly, there was something more than survival. There was joy. He began smiling again, but not the forced grin of a kid who had to perform. These were real, warm, almost shy smiles, the kind that don't come from approval, but from peace. And when people asked him how he got through it, through the collapse, the loneliness, the identity crisis, he gave a surprising answer. "I remembered what Michael told me," Culkin said. "Don't trust everyone. Find people who see you." It turns out that message, shared in hushed conversations behind closed doors, was what stayed with him. It wasn't the rides or the fame or the sleepovers at Neverland. It was the advice, the protection, the friendship. That's what their bond had always been about. Not escapism, but emotional survival. In a world that chewed up child stars and spit them out, they'd found something rare: understanding. And now, at 43, Culkin isn't just standing. He's solid. A father, a partner, an artist. A man with a story to tell. And he's finally telling it. Not for headlines or profit, but because truth, at last, feels safe to share. You don't have to explain friendships. Macaulay Culkin is done justifying who he was friends with. And why. People were always impressed by him. "I wasn't," he said with a quiet laugh. "That's probably why we got along." The world saw Michael Jackson as untouchable. Culkin just saw a man who was hurting. He's talked about it often in recent years, not in lengthy interviews, but in side comments. Podcast episodes, quiet, offhand remarks that hold a lot of weight. "You don't have to explain friendships," he said. "They either make sense to you, or they don't." That's the core of it. To the outside world, their relationship was strange. To them, it was natural. It was two people meeting in a world where no one else understood what it was like to be so visible, and yet so unseen. He didn't idolize Jackson. He didn't fear him. He just accepted him. And that, Jackson once told him, was the greatest gift anyone had ever given him. To be treated like a regular person, not a pop god, not a punchline, just Michael. And now Culkin is choosing to honor that, not with clickbait or scandal, but with sincerity. Because some friendships don't need defending. They just need to be remembered honestly. Spoken at 43, for decades, people waited for Macaulay Culkin to tell all, to reveal some buried secret, some shocking detail that would change everything we thought we knew. But when he finally did speak clearly, at 43, it wasn't explosive, it was simple. "We were two boys, lost, famous, trying to be okay. No shocking confession, no dramatics, just memory, clarity, truth." Culkin doesn't flinch when he tells it. He doesn't exaggerate. He doesn't downplay. He just speaks from where he is now. An adult, a father, someone who's made peace with his past. And that peace? It's the most surprising part of all. For a story that was once twisted by the media, picked apart by strangers, and misunderstood for decades, he's closing the chapter without bitterness. "That was my friend," he said. That's all there is to say. And maybe that's what we missed all along. Maybe the truth wasn't buried. Maybe it was just quiet, waiting for the world to listen. Macaulay Culkin didn't tell his story for shock. He told it for truth. And now we finally understand the bond that baffled the world. If this video made you think, feel, or see things differently, hit like, subscribe, and drop a comment. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next story.